Hey there, and welcome to Week 15 Boom Bust Fantasy Football Show, brought to you by Fantasy Football Advice Network and Sellout Crowd. I'm Corey, and I'm joined by my brother Kyle. It's playoff time, and we're going to break down some booms and busts at each position for you for your first week of playoffs. Now, what is a boom and what is a bust? It is whether they exceed or fall short of their projected point total for the week, based off of Fantasy Pro's full PPR projections. Kyle, let's get him the W for this first week of playoffs. What do you say?
Yeah, man, week one. Let's get it. All right, so my boom quarterback for the week is Mr. Matt Stafford, which is a little bit shocking. Early in the year, he was struggling, wasn't really startable for most of the year, but now he's finally got all of his weapons healthy. He's got Puka, he's got Kupp, he's got Kyron healthy. And the last 3 or 4 weeks, he's been playing really, really solid, getting about 20-plus points a week. This week, they got him projected 19 of 32 for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns, 18.3 points overall. But when you look at his previous games, 4 touchdowns against Arizona, 3 touchdowns versus Cleveland and Baltimore the last 2 weeks, which are 2 of the toughest matchups in the league for quarterbacks. Actually, I think the 2 toughest matchups in the league for quarterbacks. Almost 300 yards in both of those games. I think he can absolutely do it against Washington, who is a cake matchup. So I expect 300 yards, multiple TDs again. I think he gets over 20 points.
Yeah, I think having all of his weapons back is key, right? So he's just kind of been piecing together that offense. Now he's got it all. It's all coming together again. And, you look at that week against Arizona and you're like, of course he should have a good week, right? It's Arizona. But then he proved it. Like you already mentioned with Cleveland and Baltimore having great games against those two. Okay, now he gets Washington. Why wouldn't it keep rolling, right?
Exactly.
Stafford, he's fantastic. His weapons are fantastic, and it's all kind of coming together here. A little too early, too little, too late for the team, but hey, it helps us out in fantasy. So yeah, I really like that matchup against Washington this week. Perfect. Who's your bust for the week, then?
My bust quarterback for the week, Mr. Tua Tagovailoa. Now, they're playing the Jets, and here's his projection for the week. 22 of 32, 255 yards, 1.5 touchdowns, 16.1 points overall. They just played him in week 12 a few weeks ago. He had 10 points, 243 yards, a touchdown, 2 picks. Very tough pass defense. I think he probably finishes about the same this time. Maybe barely reaches double digits. I'm finding other options this week.
First of all, I want to commend you on saying his last name that well. Secondly, Tyreek Hill, I think, is listed as questionable with an ankle injury. I know he came back in that last game, but even if he plays in this week, he might be a little off, right? Like he wasn't quite the same even when he came back. So that could have an impact here. And you already mentioned that the last time they played the Jets, he did not have a good game. And he didn't have a good game last week against Tennessee. So something's going on there. It's a little off. I'm not trusting him in my first week of playoffs right now.
Right. Yeah, first week of playoffs with this matchup. You made a good point with Tyreek Hill. He came back in last week, but, he had so much adrenaline in his body. Once he got home and started, who knows what that pain is like. And so we really don't know yet what's going to happen with Hill, but that will make him even more of a bust candidate if Hill is sitting for sure.
Absolutely. All righty, let's move on to some running backs then. Who's your boom running back of the week?
Mr. Ezekiel Elliott versus Kansas City. Now, I will be the first to admit, being a Cowboys fan, I wasn't that sad to see him leave. Looked like he lost a step, was slowing down quite a bit. Last week, he looked like a whole new man, and he got 100% of the touches last week. All the runs, all the catches out of the backfield. So he's projected 18 carries for 64 yards, 0.3 touchdowns, 3 catches for 22 this week for 14 points. He did better than that against Pitt last week, who's a much better rushing defense than Kansas City. I think he can easily, repeat the same numbers from last week, 68 rushing yards, 72 receiving. pair of touchdowns. Didn't he have 2? Yeah, 2 touchdowns versus Pitt. He can get at least 1 touchdown this week. 14 points, I think. He gets closer to 20 or maybe even more. Definitely loving Ezekiel Elliott again this week.
I think he only had 1 touchdown, but it was receiving. And that receiving is really the upside here I'm surprised with, right? He had 8 targets, 7 receptions for 72 yards. Wow. That's fantastic. I want that all day. And then, like you said, he got 100% of the touches. He looked really good here. Granted, he's more rested than he is with most seasons, right? When he was the workhorse back, he's not as rested this late in the season, especially. He's wearing down. He's more rested being behind Stevenson. So I'm gonna give a little credit there to just being his rest. But he looks good. And yeah, I mean, if he played that well against Pitt, how do you not trust him this week?
Exactly.
Workhorse. It's so hard to get a workhorse back right now in fantasy that I'll take him whenever I can get him.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct. It was 1 touchdown. In my notes, I had an and sign that I thought was a 2 when I was reading them just now. So,
well, he scored so many
points. 1 touchdown, but there's no reason why he can't score again this week. So.
He scored so many points, it looks like he had multiple touchdowns. It usually takes multiple touchdowns.
Well, it's because he had a ton of catches. That's why.
It was insane. Yep, he did a fantastic job. So, all righty. Enough about Zeke. Let's move on to your bust.
Bust running back for the week, Mr. Kenneth Walker versus Philly. He's had some rough games recently. Dallas and San Fran, 2 teams that played with a lead. His volume has been really low. Again, Philly, one of the toughest. They're literally playing 3 of the toughest rush defenses all in a row. And Philly's probably the best of all of them. And I really don't expect him to do much damage at all this week against Philadelphia. I think they'll be throwing quite a bit because you can throw on Philly pretty easily. So whether it's Locke or whether it's Geno at QB this week, I think they're going to be airing it out quite a bit. And I don't think that leaves a lot of room, a lot of touches for Walker to be successful.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. The best way to beat Philly is in the air. I think we've known that all season, right? Their secondary is sus. But there's a lot of weapons. There's a lot of receiving weapons there for the Seahawks, and I think they should take advantage of that. You got Lockett, Metcalf should have a day, and then JSN. I mean, you got to use those weapons here against that defense. It's the only way you're going to beat them, I feel like. So Walker probably going to struggle against that. I mean, it's tough. You saw it against San Francisco, and I think it's going to be the same thing here.
Yeah. And one thing that I know is driving Pete Carroll crazy because he loves to run the ball is their ground game has just not been effective this year compared to prior years. Even with Walker and Charbonnet there now, they're still not running the ball really well. Since week 8, Kenneth Walker's had 1 double-digit scoring week in week 10 against Washington. It's just not happening. I would expect this offseason that the Seahawks address that situation, whether it's with their O-line or whatever. But definitely struggling this year, and it's not going to be any better against Philly this week for sure.
Pete Carroll loves to run the ball unless he's on the goal line in the Super Bowl. Exactly. Anyways, on to the – I just want to invite you to go to fantasyfootballadvice.com and join the only social media network 100% dedicated to fantasy football. You can give advice, get advice, post polls, read articles, watch videos, listen to podcasts, all that good stuff. Hang out, join the community, have a good time, and win your week. And help other people win too. Have some fun on there and hang out with us. All righty. Let's move on, Kyle, to some wide receivers. Who do you got as your first wide receiver? Boom.
Yeah, my boom receiver is Zay Flowers. Early in the season, he had some good games, but he's kind of hard to trust. You didn't know whether you could trust the volume or trust the role. He's really established himself as the top receiver on that team, but his volume has spiked even since Andrews went out. has spiked even more. He's had 20-plus fantasy points, the last couple of outings against the Chargers and Rams. 2 touchdowns against the Chargers, 1 against the Rams. Definitely the volume is there. Jacksonville could be a potential for a lot of points in this game, especially if Trevor Lawrence gets a week healthier and could play even better. He looked pretty good last week with a bum ankle. So could be potential for a lot of points in this game. I like Zay Flowers a lot. He's projected 5 catches for 62 yards, 0.4 TD, 13.7 points overall. I think he could push for over 20 again like the last couple of games.
Yeah, Zay Flowers has done well since Andrew's been out. He holds a 24% target share. I know you mentioned the volume there. He gets a huge amount of targets there. He had double-digit targets last game, and he does well with them, know. So, I mean, he caught 6 for 60 yards and a touchdown. The guy's producing, and so living up to the hype. And Lamar Jackson's playing well too. So they're on the road at Jacksonville, so you don't really got to worry about like cold weather or anything like that. So I really like this week for Zay Flowers too.
Zay Flowers has come in for that team and done what they hoped Rashad Bateman would do years ago.
Yeah, I agree. And giving credit where credit's due, Odell Beckham is playing fine also. And so that's spreading the field a little bit. They're actually having to respect Odell Beckham. And it's been a long time since any team has had to kind of spread their defense out against the Ravens, right? They've never had – it's been a long time since they've had an actual multiple wide receivers that people had to respect. And so it's spreading that field out a little bit more. And I think that plays to Zay Flowers' advantage as well. All righty, Kyle, who's your bust?
So my bust receiver of the week, for the second week in a row, actually, is Calvin Ridley.
Haters gonna hate.
He's playing against Baltimore. Last week I picked him. He was playing against Cleveland, and that was a hit. He was a bust. This week he's playing against Baltimore. I think he'll bust again. They got him projected 5 catches for 60 yards, 0.4 touchdowns, 13.1 points. I think he struggles to get – he struggled against Cincy and Cleveland the last couple of weeks. I think he struggles to get to double digits this week. Lawrence, we just talked about it, is still a little beat up. So I could see like a big Evan Ingram game again. Baltimore's a tough matchup for QBs and receivers. So I think Calvin Ridley – I know everybody got their hopes up a few weeks back when he had a couple of big games. He's had a rough stretch of matchups here. Continue to leave him on your bench for now.
Yeah, I think the loss of Christian Kirk, even though Kirk was the number 1 wide receiver, right? And Calvin Ridley still was kind of, a little bit of a roller coaster ride. Now all of that attention shifts to Ridley, right? Ridley is going to get all that attention from the secondary. Now, that opened up Evan Ingram. I think he's kind of – and we've seen it in the past. Trevor Lawrence really leans on Evan Ingram in situations like this. So I think Evan Ingram is the beneficiary. Calvin Ridley, not so much. He gets way too much attention with Christian Kirk out, and that hurts him tremendously. Also, he's just not trustworthy. He's been up and down. I mentioned it earlier. Kind of a roller coaster ride, kind of that boomer bust player. Right now, it seems like we're kind of just settling on the bust side of things, though.
Yeah, boom and bust guys, you got to be real careful with in the playoffs. They can cost you a playoff matchup.
But check back with us next week when he plays Tampa Bay, and then the week after that when he plays Carolina. Might be singing a different tune. But for right now, playing against Baltimore, that's a no-go.
Yeah, that's going to be a no for me, dog.
All righty, let's move on to tight ends. Who you got as your boom tight end?
My boom tight end of the week. He was my bust last week. Not making that mistake again. Moving into boom, Mr. David Njoku for the Browns playing against Chicago. So apparently Joe Flacco loves to throw to his tight end. Turns out the Harrison Bryant game was a fluke in week 13 and got back on track with Njoku this week. Caught a couple of touchdowns, had a huge game. Chicago is an even better matchup this week. He's projected 4 catches for 44 yards, 0.3 touchdowns, 10.1 points overall. I think that's absurd. I think he's easily in the 15 to 20 point range again, maybe even higher. I love it. I'm getting David Njoku in every lineup where I own him.
This guy has been definition of consistent all
Mm-hmm.
year, right? With exception to maybe the very beginning of the season. Bygones be bygones. And then that one Harrison Bryant weekend. Otherwise, he's been scoring, 11 plus points almost every week for you. And then last week, we just saw what he was capable of. I do agree that Chicago is an even better matchup than Jacksonville. And then, heck, next week he has Houston. I'm loving this guy. And Joe Flacco, apparently, also loving this guy. He's probably on Joe Flacco's fantasy team. So that's just my guess. After the usage last week, that's just my best guess. So I'm rolling with that, and I love Njoku moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, who's your bust tight end of the week?
My bust tight end of the week is Mr. Trey McBride, and he has been crushing it and doing great since Kyler's been back too. No more Ertz, he's gone, but they play San Francisco this week, and San Francisco plays the tight end position very, very tough. They've got him projected 5 catches for 53 yards, 0.3 TDs, 12.1 points. I think he'll be lucky to get to double digits at all.
Those San Francisco linebackers can cover.
Yes, they can.
They just can. And they get to the quarterback really quick. Yeah, I agree with you. I think this just isn't the right matchup, even as good as he has been since taking over, or even before that, honestly. Trey McBride's been great, but I'm not trusting him this week against San Francisco. That San Francisco defense is the real deal.
Yes.
So not trusting him this week. All right. That does it for our booms and busts for the week. But now let's go ahead and move over into some streamer picks. Streamer at kicker and one streamer at defense that you can give everybody. So let's do the kicker first. Who's your streamer kicker of the week?
Streamer kicker of the week is Mr. Lucas Havrisik. It's either Havrisik or Havrisik.
You did better with Tua's last name than this.
I don't know where the emphasis goes in this name. I haven't got to watch a ton of Rams games.
On the wrong syllable there, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's Havrisik. Anyways, playing for the Rams. We talked about the Rams earlier when I talked about Stafford. I think there's a potential for quite a few points this week. I think the Rams have a very good game. And this guy is not owned hardly anywhere because the Rams have not been playing well until the last couple of weeks. So now all of a sudden you've got another potential kicker you can pick up and play for a team that's scoring points. And if you've had one of these disappointing kickers this year, then he's a good one to pick up and play this week.
I agree. Showing in Sleeper is 0% rostered. So that's how little he's rostered. And I'm going to say for, what is this, week 15? Probably the 15th time this year. You want a kicker who's going to be in scoring position for a lot of the game, right? Just scoring position, whether they're kicking extra points or getting out there and stalling in the red zone or something to kick field goals. And I think that the Rams can get in scoring position against Washington a lot, very often. So you kind of hope they're not punching it into the end zone and scoring touchdowns the whole time if you're streaming this kicker, but they're going to be in scoring position and racking up some points. He's had double-digit scoring the last 2 weeks against Cleveland and Baltimore. So this offense is coming alive, and I like this streamer pick.
Streamer kick pick.
All right, let's move on to your defense.
All right, my streamer defense for the week is the Atlanta Falcons. They're playing against Carolina. This team has been playing pretty good defense all year. They had a rough week last week against Tampa Bay, but otherwise they've been playing pretty well, pretty consistent. This week against Carolina, Bryce Young, has been turning the ball over, taking sacks all year long. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game, and that's good for defense as well. So, not very widely owned either. I've seen them on waivers in a bunch of my leagues, almost all of them, in fact. Definitely like them this week as a matchup play.
Yeah, I agree. This team last time they played Carolina, they had double-digit scoring. And of course, defenses score different leagues, but they scored well. And so they did really well. This team actually does create turnovers quite a bit. They force quite a bit of fumbles, and they actually get quite a few interceptions. So they're creating turnovers, which is definitely what you want in a defense that you're lining up. So as you mentioned, Carolina's turned the ball over. Bryce Young not performing so well. They don't have a lot of weapons. So I like this matchup for Atlanta, and I can see a few turnovers happening here.
Totally agree.
Yep. Alrighty. That's going to do it for our booms, busts, and streamers for the week. I want to invite you one more time to go to fantasyfootballadvice.com and join the social media network 100% dedicated to fantasy football, guys. Go over there, have a good time, and help each other out, answer questions, ask questions if you need help, and just have a good time with it. Also, download our mobile app, and you can have it at your fingertips at all times. It's incredible. Get that fantasy football help. So that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you guys, and good luck in your first week of playoffs.
Yeah, go get those wins.